Hi, thank you for coming. My name is Christopher Phillips. I'm a first year at the college. My question's for Mr. Stelter. You've all spoken extensively about Fox News being a purveyor of disinformation, but CNN is right up there with them. They pushed the Russian collusion hoax. They pushed the Jussie Smollett hoax. They smeared Justice Kavanaugh as a rapist, and they also smeared Nick Sandmann as a white supremacist. And yes, they dismissed the Hunter Biden laptop affair as pure Russian disinformation. With mainstream corporate journalists becoming little more than apologists and cheerleaders for the regime, is it time to finally declare that the canon of journalistic ethics is dead or no longer operative? All the mistakes of the mainstream media and CNN in particular seem to magically all go in one direction. Are we expected to believe that this is all just some sort of random coincidence, or is there something else behind it?
It's too bad. It's time for lunch.
You have 30 seconds.
No, I mean,
Brian.
there's a clock that says 30 seconds. But I think my honest answer to you, and I'll come over and talk in more detail after this, is that I think you're describing a different channel than the one that I watch. But I understand that that is a popular right-wing narrative about CNN. I think it's important when we talk about shared reality and democracy. All these networks, all these news outlets have to defend democracy. And when they screw up, admit it. But when Benjamin Hall, the Fox correspondent, was wounded in Ukraine, the news crews at CNN and the New York Times stopped what they were doing, and they tried to help. They tried to help him get out of the country. They tried to find the dead crew members. That's what news outlets do. That's how they actually do work together. To your question about sharing those kinds of connections and trust, we don't talk about it enough, though. We don't share that reality about how that happens. And with regards to the regime, I think you mean the President Biden. The last time I spoke with a Biden aide, we yelled at each other. So that's the reality of the news business that people don't see, that people don't hear. They imagine that it's a situation that simply is not. But I think your question, it speaks to the failure of journalism to show our work and show the reality of how our profession operates. We have a lot of work to do, I think.
All right, people. Sorry about that. Can you imagine? Just dissect that response for a second, but get to the question. Is impeccable. It's impeccable because it's objective in that it's nonpartisan. Fox News is bad, but you guys are worse. Now, some people might consider that to be partisan, but it's premised on the fact that all of mainstream media has a big problem. Having a big problem across all of mainstream media is far different or not mutually exclusive than one or two networks having a very, very big problem in particular. And we've heard, if you follow Project Veritas, if you pay attention to the news, we've heard CNN in particular is uniquely bad. They got the guy Zucker or Zuckerberg. No, it's Zucker. It's Zucker at CNN. They've got Zucker and staff recognizing that they are going with a narrative, an anti-Trump narrative. This kid's question is perfect. And I'm calling him a kid to be demeaning at all. This gentleman, this young man's question. First of all, his demeanor is amazing. He looks like he does martial arts, or he looks physically fit, in shape, and confident. Confident to be asking a question. I don't know if he had butterflies in his stomach. If that would be one of my questions to him. He's getting up there. I don't know what his history was, but he knows that he's making history with this question. He's taking it to Brian Stelter with a gosh darn well-prepared, well-crafted, well-researched, and well-presented question. If he didn't know how viral this clip would go, I guess either be careful what you wish for or you learn the hard way if you didn't want this in the first place. The 5 examples: Kavanaugh, Sandmann, Russia collusion, Biden. I forget the 5th one. I think the 5th one was, I forget. 5 concrete examples where CNN messed up. My only issue with the question is that it could have stopped after, are the canons of journalism dead? The second part, presuppose an intention, which we don't need to presuppose because we know it. Is something else going on? Yeah, we know what else is going on. We've heard the audio. My only critique, and that's just because I'm looking for a way to look smart. That question was glorious, and Stetler's uncomfortable response, got to go to lunch. Yeah, ha ha ha. Let me dodge it. Let me dodge it by making a joke. Don't be hard on me. I'm a nice, friendly, jolly man who purveys misinformation and exploits people's ignorance by doing it. And then goes into And by the way, I was joking about Stelter gesticulating with his hands because I'm well aware that I'm quite guilty of that myself. It's just that when someone's doing things and I feel that they're lying, I judge their gesticulation a little differently. When Stelter says, we need to work together, and jokingly tries to avoid the question, says, I'll talk to you more afterwards. I'd be curious to know if they did. The cynic in me, the adult who's past the shreddies, says, was it shreddies or cornflakes? Whatever. The adult in me says they never spoke again after that, but I'd love to know. He brings up the example, immediately goes to the exploiting of injured, literally exploiting of tragedy in his own defense. When the reporter in Ukraine was injured and the other ones were killed, we stopped what we were doing, providing propaganda, and we went to help. Fine. Let's just take for granted you went and you did that. You went out of your way. You worked together to get them out of harm's way. Good for you. You did something good. Has nothing to do with your propaganda journalism. And so it's the classic diversion is, look, I'm a good boy. Don't get mad at me for that because I did something good somewhere else, totally unrelated. But just to literally use victims as a shield to this question, it's par for the course for the CNN misinformation, disinformation, dishonesty. And then to say that our failure as journalists is not to focus on the good that we're doing, as opposed to just be honest. And did he say something about admitting mistakes when they make mistakes? As far as I know, I don't believe they ever apologized to Sandman. I may be wrong. And if I am wrong, I will correct myself publicly and loud. I don't believe they ever apologized to Sandman. They settled with him, but I don't believe they ever apologized to Sandman. I know for a fact that, unless she did it recently, Elizabeth Warren and Deborah Haaland never even took down their tweets. So imagine this flagrant hypocrite dancing and prancing and distracting and conflating to what was probably the best question ever asked, and that's the type of question that CNN should be asking to the Biden administration. That's the type of question that they should be asking all of them. Covering up for the Hunter Biden laptop, which arguably, but not so arguably, impacted an election. That is independent journalists actively working to affect the outcomes of elections. Oh, but CNN, they're supposed to. We're supposed. Sandman, Kavanaugh. It's one after the other, and there is no answer for it. There is no answer for it. There's no possible answer for it because the dishonesty, the deceit, the malicious conduct, the irresponsible conduct, it's just such a long proven track record that you can't just all of a sudden say, yeah, we made a mistake. Sorry about that. We'll do better. So, let me see here. So this is an interesting question. When you're providing something of value, typically you've got to register it as a campaign donation. Something of value. It doesn't have to be a check. It could be free advertising. It could be promotional services that may not, it may not have a monetary value or an easily determinable one. But when you provide a service, something of value, you need to disclose it, declare it. What they did was effectively the catch and kill strategy of tabloid journalism. Or it was effectively the catch and kill, which is what the Trump campaign did with the Stormy Daniels story. Buy it, buy the rights to it, and then make sure it never gets published. The problem is that costs money. So this was effectively a catch and kill, except there was no catch, there was no kill. It was just an ignore and stifle. But same outcome. And the only difference being when you do the catch and kill for a news story, it costs you lots of money. And so that is to effectively confirm mutatis mutandis that the stifle and ignore is a form of catch and kill. It has monetary value, immeasurable monetary value. It is an immeasurable campaign donation. I agree. That's, we had discussed something along those lines at some point during one of the streams, but yeah, it's, anyways, it was a great question. I'd love to have the young gentleman on for, pop in for 20, 30 minutes to talk about the experience. But he's got to have some training, that predates this question, because it was not a fluke of a question. And it was not a fluke of a delivery either. It was great. It was fun to watch. Let me see here. We got in the chats, and then we're going to get into Stormy Daniels, meanwhile, now owes Trump legal fees, as does Shirley Teeter, the alleged bird dogger, who has now been ordered to pay legal fees to litigation costs to Project Veritas in the order of $15,000, $15,000 and change. Furious George, I get that name. So it's great question. More embarrassment for Brian Stelter, and he deserves it. It's and to call your show reliable sources. I mean, I guess it is reliable sources in the sense that you can reliably know that the sources are going to be politically biased, intellectually dishonest, and absolutely wildly driven by narrative. So I guess it's reliable in that sense. Please have the kid on. Well, we'll see. I mean, if people don't want to or can't, I mean, I don't. It's not a question of shaming. I've reached out to him, so fingers crossed we can make it happen. And next week could be a big week because there's some interesting names on the back burner that I just have to the timing has to work out because there's a lot of moving parts in everybody's lives. Oh yeah, Rittenhouse. That was the other one. Rittenhouse. Well, Rittenhouse is much more complicated. Once you've been, formally criminally charged, it does become different and more difficult to allege defamation because he was formally criminally charged. So what's going to be the damage to his reputation to say that he shot, because one of the false claims, which was in the Independent, it was a British newspaper. I think it was the Independent. Anyways, they overtly said he shot 3 black males at the BLM protest, like the day of his acquittal. That was what they said in the bullet points of their article. They then, immediately edited it to say he shot 3 males at a Black Lives Matter protest to leave it ambiguous. But then the questions, would be, that's a factually incorrect statement, but what's going to be the impact? What's going to be the damage to an individual who went through a trial for a murder trial? I mean, he was acquitted. So it's much more complicated with Rittenhouse in law, more difficult, I should say. Because he was criminally charged, he went through a trial. Sandman, he just had his life ruined in the absence of an actual criminal charges and in the absence of a trial after which he could effectively be vindicated or acquitted in any event. So, there's an argument that it's even more unjust because there was never even a trial that he can now say, look, I was acquitted, I'm innocent. No, always guilty in the public mind. I know people who still think Sandman had a bastard smirk on his face, that he should have just walked away. I still know people who think that kid exemplifies, intolerance in America. Or what was it? I think it was, as Philly D said, hatred in America. He stands against hatred. And then when he has to swallow his words and come to grips with the fact, Philip DeFranco, that he made a baseless accusation that maligned this 16-year-old kid, he says, I stand by my statement that I stand against hatred. Good for you. You know what? If you have to come out and publicly say you stand against hatred, something in me suspects that you don't actually stand against hatred. Thinking you need to come out and say that you stand against things which are obviously bad causes me to question whether or not you actually think that they're bad, because no rational, logical person thinks that people are morally required to come out and publicly state that they object to things which are morally reprehensible. No rational person actually thinks that. No love-filled person thinks that if you don't come out and say you stand against racism, you stand against hatred, you stand against violence, that you somehow endorse it. No rational person actually thinks that. And anybody who says, you didn't condemn it enough, you don't condemn violence, you don't condemn that which is bad by its very nature. You don't need to. And anybody who expects you to has an ulterior motive there, and probably an ulterior set of moral standards. They probably think that it's justified when they think it's justified. Okay,